Hello, and welcome to Art with Miss Michelle. Today we're going to draw an animal with scales. So for this project, you'll need a couple pieces of paper or a sketchbook. We're going to do a little practice drawing and then draw our animal. And something to draw with, colored pencils. I was going to use a Sharpie so it'll show up in the video a little bit better. And an animal, a picture of an animal or a live animal if you have one, with scales. So a lot of times we think of really common scaly animals like snakes, lizards, alligators. These are really fun and really good practice to draw. Some lizards have really cool different patterns, like their face has all different sizes of scales and they have little spikes, and then their body scales are a little bit more uniform, so those are always really fun to draw. But some scaled animals that are pretty overlooked, I think, are the armadillo, which are really cool, and the pangolin, which are these awesome, they're actually mammals with really cool body armor looking scales. So, or of course, I don't know if I mentioned fish, but you can choose whatever interests you. And it's always good to have the reference photo, especially when we're doing the scales, because they can be pretty intricate and you're going to want to look at the patterns. Okay, so depending on the animal that I'm going to draw, they might have different looking scales. So some scales are going to be more uniform and the same size. Some scales might be more rounded. Some might be pointier. And obviously these ones are much bigger. So one common mistake that people can make when drawing scales is to just make them like even with each other and line up together. Usually they actually are kind of spaced out. So if you wanted to draw them free scale, if you drew one row, your next scale would start about halfway in between one scale and end halfway in between the next scale. So that's just a way you can kind of practice freehanding your scales. So I could probably make these without really looking at the picture, but if I want to get that nice detail, I'm going to look at my animal and see exactly the pattern. Some scales are kind of longer and spikier, and usually the spiky part, this end, is going to point like towards the tail or the back of the animal, depending on what you're drawing. Now, the other thing about the scales is that they're not going to be just like straight like this on the animal's body. So as the animal, like say we have an arm here, as it bends and it's kind of rounded, the scales are going to go with the shape of the animal. So one way I can practice this, and you're not going to want to use a Sharpie, you're going to want to use a pencil and draw these lines very lightly, but it was requested that I use something darker in the video so people could see it a little better. So I'm just going to draw this kind of grid pattern and see how my lines are kind of curving with the roundness of the leg. And then in each space you can draw a scale, and that's going to help you line up where they're going to go. And it's also going to kind of help because you can see, just like anything else, under each scale you're going to see a little bit of a shadow. So if I have to make my scales a little bit darker to cover these lines, when I draw them in, it's going to help me make a little bit of a natural shadow when I draw them. You could also try this with your spiky pattern, or some scales. I kind of think alligator scales are almost like a round shape. And also, like I said, they might have different scales on different parts of their body on the same animal. And then when I get to the sides here, I might see just part of the scale. So you can try this grid method and practice drawing different types of scales, like pointier scales. And I have seen artists do an entire picture where they do this grid on like their whole snake and fill in the entire thing. So even if they're really good at drawing this type of thing, they still like to use the grid to help them get the different shapes that they need. So once you're ready and you've practiced a couple different kinds of spikes, you can draw your animal. And I also had a request to do a snake, so I'm going to do this green snake sitting in a tree. So like I did with my furry animal, I'm going to look at it, see what kind of details I can see what kind of parts of the body are rounded. If you have a lizard, you'll have to see what kind of legs it has. And then I'm going to outline my animal. Okay, and then once I have my animal outlined, and this snake is actually kind of interesting to draw because it has so many twisty lines and they just twist around themselves. Oh, I forgot this little tiny part down here. So then I can decide if I want to try to do my guidelines or just do my pattern. And animals like this, like snakes and lizards and stuff, they generally have some bigger, different looking scales on their heads, which I think are really fun to draw. And then their body has more uniform looking scales. And remember, you're just trying to get a pattern that looks like scales. I obviously wouldn't expect you to copy every single scale, so please don't try to. It'll be very frustrating for you, I think, but if you can just kind of see what the pattern looks like and try to copy that, then you can make a really realistic looking snake or whatever kind of scaly animal you want to draw. So if I want to do my pattern of like the twists of the body, I can start with a really light color. And I'm really gonna have to pay attention here to which direction the scales are going. And that is gonna twist a lot with my snake shape. And I'm gonna try to make my little sections kind of small because this snake has small scales. And if I make them too big, then my pattern doesn't really work. And then I'm gonna take my darker green and start filling in the scales. And I think I'll get a really nice pattern. Now, what I might want to do is just try doing the guidelines for like the first part of the snake, and then after I draw this for a while, I'll probably get the hang of it, so I might not need to do it on the whole body. But I find that once I kind of get going on something, it gets a little bit easier, and my hand and eye is kind of trained. So I'm already kind of like seeing, oh, I need to start in between the middle of this two scales in the last row that I drew. And I can just kind of keep going on this and fill as much as I can in. And then what I will probably end up doing when I start to color this is I see some bluish, darker green places and some white places. So I'll go over those first, maybe add some of these dark shadows in between the coils of the snake. And I see like on the side right here, I have a dark shadow. And then some lighter spots. So just look for different color variations and then you can color it in. And I'm gonna want to probably use different greens than what I use to outline the scales, or use a different color for the scales than I want to use to color it in. Because if I started coloring it with the green that I'm using, I think I would just cover up all my hard work of drawing the scales. So I'm just gonna keep going on my pattern, work on this snake, make it look as realistic as I can. And I think as long as you do like any kind of scale pattern, it's going to look very realistic. And this is gonna take some time, but it's gonna be super cool when I'm done. So thanks for watching my video. I hope you like this project, and happy scale drawing.